This video demonstrates how to inspect blueberry plants for signs of mummyberry disease. Annual scouting is a crucial part of preventing and managing mummyberry disease in blueberries for several reasons. First, it helps to inform decisions about when mulching practices must be completed. It's best to have your mulching finished by the time of floral bud break. Second, scouting helps to predict the level of mummyberry that should be expected in a given season, and allows one to develop an appropriate control plan. Third, scouting for signs of mummyberry helps determine whether or not preventative methods are working effectively. Mummyberry is a fungal disease that commonly infects blueberries. It's typical in the Northwest, mainly due to constant high levels of moisture throughout the year. The disease begins when the fungus infects new vegetative tissue at bud break, the stage when the scales on the apical flower buds separate and new green tissue emerges. Infection can also occur inside the newly opened flowers themselves. Once this occurs, the infected plant tissue produces a spore, called a conidia, which is believed to be vectored to other flowers by pollinators. If infected flowers are pollinated, they develop into berries, and the fungus continues to grow inside. This causes the berry to take on a shriveled, discolored appearance. The diseased berry is referred to as a mummy. Mummyberries typically drop to the ground where they remain over the winter, still harboring the fungus. In spring, when the humidity, temperature, and light levels are right, a tiny mushroom-like structure called an apithecia emerges from the overwintered mummies. When the apithecia matures, it releases spores that then infect new plant material. The whole cycle then repeats over the course of the new growing season.
So around March, maybe early April, those apithecia will emerge from the mummy, and then wind will carry them up and they'll land on new vegetative tissue. And so this happens right around bud break. It's pretty well synchronized with the host. And so as the bud scales begin to open on the plant, susceptible tissue is available to be infected. And so after that, it will start blighting back tissue. And so new leaves that come out, or sometimes the tip, will start to turn brownish, a little necrotic, or like looking kind of dead. And then there will be a mat of fungal spores on there. And that mat of fungal spores is the secondary disease. And then it's thought that pollinators will actually contact it and move it to healthy flowers. And once the spores are deposited on the stigma of that blueberry flower, it'll grow through the style into the ovary and then infect the fruit.
Scouting for mummyberry takes some detective work. You need to know what to look for, where to look for it, and when to start looking. Early in the season, the most recognizable sign of mummyberry is the apithecia, the small, dark brown fungal pod that emerges on the ground from the mummyberries that dropped during the previous season. You should begin scouting for apithecia in mid-March and continue looking for them on a weekly basis. The best places to inspect are along the edges of mulch and grass strips, around the base of the crowns, and in other areas where fallen berries tend to accumulate. These are the spots where mummyberries from the previous season are likeliest to have overwintered, so this is where you're likeliest to find apithecia if it's present.
If you're imagining that you have all these mummified berries all over the bush, they're going to fall down, and if you're on a mound, they're probably going to roll, especially when you have rain. Rain causes them to move, wind causes them to move. And so generally they'll roll kind of into an alley that's right beside the blueberry bush. And then the leaves will fall at the end of summer, and they'll generally get covered up. And so when I'm looking for mummyberry, I generally go straight to the alley and kind of look under that brush.
When you discover apithecia, keep a record of that date so that you have a close approximation of when that stage of the disease cycle began. Likewise, when you cease to find apithecia, keep a record of that date as well. To the extent that is possible and practical, remove or destroy the apithecia and any mummyberries as you find them. This will be more or less feasible depending on the size of the operation, but it could offer benefits. Since new mummyberry infection begins at bud break, keeping the fungal organism to a minimum prior to and during that stage will reduce the opportunity for released spores to generate new infection. It's thought that mulching could be one strategy that might help control apothecia. Researchers at Oregon State University are currently working with NCAP and blueberry growers to determine the effectiveness of mulching and what mulch depth would be required to control apothecia effectively in typical Northwest growing conditions. For more information on alternatives to pesticides, visit NCAP online at pesticide.org or see our other videos at youtube.com/NCAPvids.
On Blueberry Hill and lingered until my dreams came true. The wind in the willow played love's sweet melody.